us should tolerate the loss of institutional memory in infrastructure. Because when we lose our institutional memory, it weakens the very fabric of infrastructure, and it weakens the very fabric and capacity to learn from the past, learn from success and learn from failure. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of scope for improvement for all of us in infrastructure. And some of you may remember that in 2008, Stefan Straub, on behalf of the World Bank, summarised the results of 80 econometric models from around the world to understand the impact of infrastructure spending on economic output. The results of this investigation were very concerning, so I will restate them today, here, because I think that they are as relevant today as they were 11 years ago. The good news with the Straub analysis was that for the OECD nations, that it is more likely than not that infrastructure spending will have a positive impact on economic output. However, the likelihood of infrastructure spending having no effect on economic output was about 22%. And there was an even more alarming chance that 9% of spending will have a negative impact on economic output. In the case of the developing world, the situation is far more troubling. Straub's analysis indicated that there is a 55% chance that infrastructure spending will have no impact on economic output. 55%. And only 36% of it being possibly positive. What Straub has pointed out is that there is a real possibility that we have systemic, ineffective infrastructure spending. And this is entrenched around the globe. Even if you discount Straub's analysis by 50% because of econometric assumptions and other points of view, the numbers remain very disturbing. So whatever might be your point of view about infrastructure spending and its impact on economic output, Straub's work helps us to understand what the community is trying to say to us. And that is that government and industry must work together better to lift your performance. Together, we must be more motivated to reforms that stamp out short-termism and to refocus on the main issues of long-term benefit creation. Infrastructure can be much more than just a short-term sugar hit to the economy, where in Australia all we hear about is the number of construction jobs that the next infrastructure project will create. One step in that direction is to have a realistic perspective when it comes to setting ambitious infrastructure spending targets. Getting the quantum of money right is obviously important. But it is only the beginning of the journey, and quite possibly the easiest part. In my experience, the hardest hurdle to clear is choosing the right projects and then executing them well so that economic output, productivity and livability are all enhanced sooner rather than later. The uncomfortable reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that governments and multilateral development banks continue to find the process of picking the right projects to have impact on economic growth to be very difficult to do. I'd now like to return to some remarks about land use planning. It is often said that the fate of a tree is determined at the time of planting. Planting the wrong tree in the wrong location will have devastating consequences for the tree and its ability to grow and thrive over time. The same is true for infrastructure. Choosing the right tree to plant for its location has a lot in common with project selection and prioritisation. An important area of practical reform and stewardship that Peru and Australia can learn from each other concerns land use planning. This has been a really difficult journey in Australia. Progress has been painfully slow. But at least in my home state of New South Wales, there has been a realisation and indeed an awakening about one very important point, and that is that land use planning and infrastructure planning is the same thing. Australia is in the midst of a moment of truth, where scarcity of land in our cities, the lack of protection of valuable land corridors to provide roads and utilities is preventing cost-effective solutions, making it difficult to create new jobs locally and to provide affordable housing. If that is the case in Peru as well, then the very first step in demonstrating the nation's forward thinking and competence in infrastructure will be through establishing an independent land planning commission. Sydney has finally established one for Sydney, not for the country, just Sydney. And such a body is called the Greater Sydney Commission. And it works closely with transport agencies and local government in making long-term plans for residential and commercial land around detailed livability metrics. And these are organised around the concept of a 30-minute city. It's imperative that before the next big wave of investment in infrastructure, that there is a well-conceived and accepted land use plan. Australia has a partial one. What does Peru have? Maybe it is working on this. While it may not constitute the traditional idea of hard infrastructure, roads, bridges, tunnels, buildings, a national land use plan will ensure the nation is seeking to develop its land in the best possible way. Land use planning is also a necessary precondition to ensuring the infrastructure today can be the best it can possibly be tomorrow. An effective and comprehensive land use plan for Peru will help ensure the infrastructure X factor has the best chance of taking root for the most and to contribute benefit to the most people and with the greatest value for money. Paul Romer, the 2015 Nobel Prize winner for economics, has regularly argued, we must think of our cities and regions as places where people get the benefits of interacting with one another. Romer's essential thesis is that nations must do what happens every year at the Burning Man Festival in the Nevada desert. The picture. You may have heard about this festival of the Burning Man, where 70,000 people come together around 10 principles, including, for example, radical inclusion, decommoditisation, civic responsibility, and leaving no trace. So too, infrastructure must stake out the equivalent of the Burning Man Festival street grid, as you can see there. Separate public and private space, leave room for what comes next in the spirit of creating the best possible environment for creativity and reciprocity among the people. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no market mechanism, there is no private sector organisation that can create a land use plan for a nation. This is what government must do first, for the infrastructure X factor to have any chance of taking root in a country. I am concerned, however, that around the world, that the infrastructure industry has lost its clarity as to the fundamental reason for what we do. It is my opinion that the purpose should be to build and manage infrastructure assets and services to improve the quality of life, both economically and socially, so that we have stronger and more vibrant communities. Many of you could be thinking, well, of course, that's what we do. By building more infrastructure, that's the way we contribute. But what if the assumption that more projects leads to better infrastructure outcomes is simply flawed. What if this assumption that you just by doing more projects makes you complacent? The time has come for our professional contribution to infrastructure to change, starting with a shift to a stewardship mindset, if the long-term impact of our work is to be taken seriously. I believe that with such an illustrious group of infrastructure leaders here today, that we've gathered here, as we gather here, that it's incumbent on all of us to challenge ourselves and to challenge each other to strive for what really matters. And that is the customers that our infrastructure serves and the communities they come from. My research over the past 10 years at the University of Sydney point to a failure in the industry to properly recognise that customers matter. And in extreme cases, there is a denial they actually exist at all. In fact, there are many organisations today that regard people they are providing services to simply as users rather than customers. One CEO of a very large and nationally important infrastructure asset in Australia that we work with correctly pointed out that a user in colloquial English is someone who shoots up illicit drugs. I can try and persuade you of the importance of customers, but if there is a reluctance to even give them a name, then we have an even bigger problem. Could I be so bold to ask whether your infrastructure services is good enough to cause your customers to trust your organisation if prices need to go up? Or would your customers mobilise to protect your organisation should government seek to change the policy that may be adverse to your organisation? I know that many of you come from large infrastructure organisations, some of which may even be monopolies. However, as our economic and social circumstances change, it is obvious to me that the idea of a safe and untouchable monopoly without accountability to its customers is rapidly breaking down. If your customers turn against you, your longevity as an owner or operator will be very limited. Indeed, many large infrastructure organisations around the world, whether it's in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand or Japan, are learning very, very quickly of the political risk consequences that result from not listening and failing your customers. Moreover, technology has the power to fundamentally change your relationship with your customers, for better or for worse. So without attention to your customers and their changing needs, it will be impossible for you to adapt your services appropriately, and you may well find yourself with an outdated and redundant business model.